Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Warcraft news. Yeah, this week we've got, I think, some news that people will be pretty darn thrilled about, plus a deeper topic, one that's been bubbling to the surface over the last few months: the difference in communications practices between the classic and live development teams. And when you get into what's really going on there, the real core of it, it's a lot more deep than I think many of us will have first thought. First though, this month's Patreon rewards are going to be gone tomorrow, so if you're interested in getting either of these two guys and of course the hunter-themed tasty sticker, yeah, I'll send one of these your way next week if you're on that Patreon tier by the time this month takes over, so it's your last chance. You've got the super crispy art card, bestiary, and the class sticker, which is not just any old sticker, it's a really strong vinyl sticker that really will last. So that's what's going on over there, and I just threw up a vlog today there as well. Okay, with that, let's get into the video. So, Azerite knowledge? Artifact knowledge? Artifact power? Azerite knowledge? What? What's even going on? Yeah, even Blizzard seemed confused with this post announcing that Azerite knowledge will continue to scale for another 4 weeks. Of course, it's actually artifact knowledge, I believe, but yeah, this does mean that that's going to be ticking up with the next reset. And this is actually really big news. Knowledge was set to halt this week, not to increase again, of course, until patch 8.2's launch, which will be a decent few months away. Of course, every knowledge level makes powering up your Heart of Azeroth easier. The minimum amount per level of AP is, I think, capped at 1,000, like a minimum of 1,000, but, well, if you use this handy Wowhead chart, you can sort of work out the just the quantities that you need, but really, it's mental how much more time efficient things will be if you just wait a few more weeks before you put in the grind. Artifact knowledge continuing to progress is particularly great over the next few weeks for those who want to dabble in the Crucible of Storms and don't want to farm right now. So for you guys, it's probably best to leave most of your catch-up until the last week or two so that you can save a bunch of time. Past that, of course, yeah, they're throwing artifact knowledge at us. That further decreases the importance of artifact power progression by making it easier, and that's something that's going to be a major point of interest for patch 8.2. Of course, we know that future Azerite gear will not include traits that require more than the current levels of artifact power, and that means that you'll always be able to unlock a full set of Azerite gear traits for all the 8.2 and beyond gear, with the artifact power levels instead progressing you through something on the Heart of Azeroth itself. We don't really know what yet. Overall, I think it really will be a better situation with 8.2, but to be honest, I wish that the infinitely filling endgame bar in WoW was not player power related. I really think Blizzard could do something a bit more interesting there, and I actually do have a video that covers that next week, so yes, that's something we'll get to. So there you go, some good news, let's move on. WoW Classic versus Live. The Live team have been hammered on their communications policies for quite some time indeed. It certainly is something that even I've been talking about for a long time, pretty much since the beginning of this channel's existence. They have been and still are kind of struggling in spite of genuine efforts being made. Well, one Warcraft team is not receiving the same type of criticism, the Classic team, especially with the posts that they have been making over the last week, posts that we will cover shortly. It may seem here like one group are just better than their jobs than the other, but that's not really the case when you actually dive into the substance of it. So players have of course been quite vocal about Classic, and that's something that the team have been pretty darn good at addressing. Whenever major topics crop up, they make posts that contain specific details that are, covering what they're going to do, then they talk about the broader context, they talk about how it fits into the philosophy of the Classic project, and we have seen this both recently with the spell batching and loot sharing topics that have rolled out over the last 7 days, but also with the Classic phase rollout plan, which is something that evolved from its BlizzCon state to being near perfect as of their big post around 3 weeks ago. And this has meant that players have felt listened to and they felt respected. Now, when you compare that to the Live team, well, many of us have been making specific criticisms for months, indeed even for years. We typically get responses that are fluffy and philosophical. They don't really have specific details. They almost always lack definite action, and they're often met with strawman oversimplifications. It has not been a satisfying game feedback experience, and it's something that has led to a growing disconnect between many World of Warcraft players and the developers who make the game. We typically get vague posts and seemingly random tweets. generally inconsistent levels of communication, with that communication almost being independent of the severity of the issue, with the recent ban wave being a fantastic example, where the only tweet that we got was far too late and was from a Blizzard staff member who was acting in a rather unprofessional manner on Twitter. Of course, they rightly did delete their tweet, but still, I mean, look, I could go a lot harder in that particular instance, but I don't think that's the right card to play from a strategic position. It's a situation where definitely personal but work-adjacent tweets face more scrutiny due to there being a lack of official and satisfying communication on core issues. So you've got poor communication and you've got these Q&As, which generally tend to leave a lot desired because we're almost always going through the same motions on the same topics, Q&A after Q&A. Not much progress is made. So you might be wondering, what's going on? Why are things so different between Live and Classic? Well, look, I do think the Live team absolutely is doing a pretty weak, below par job with their communications, but it also is the case that they have a harder job to do. With Classic, you're dealing with a large and fairly consistent community. The vast majority pretty much do want Classic as it was, with the groups of players that form Classic fans being overall, I would say, less divided than with Live. With Classic, you have endgame PvE and PvP players, and then you kind of have the casual players, and that's pretty much it. The game is a fairly singular, cohesive experience. It's just, a large one that takes a lot of time to progress through. That means that the community communications can be a lot more targeted to specific issues, and since it is not a live product, there is far less in the way of, firefighting current problems that the team has to do, and that means they can focus on the core issues that the community has. Simply put, Classic is not out yet, and both developers and players share a fairly similar core vision of what it should be. Things could not be more different with Live World of Warcraft. Instead of making one cohesive experience that appeals to a large number of players, the team have instead made a game that consists of many often rather disconnected kind of mini-games all along their own tracks that appeal to different group of players. Over time, this has led to a stratification of the player base, making Blizzard's job extremely hard. They are trying to specifically cater to many groups of players at once, and I would argue that this has somewhat led to a loss in overall design vision for World of Warcraft, making both development and community relations far harder to manage. Basically, instead of players and developers kind of spinning a big plate together, well, now it's basically just the developers are trying to spin 15 different plates at the same time for 15 different groups of players. Simply put, the player base is fundamentally more divided in modes of play due to the design of the game, and how each one of those modes of play is specifically catered to. Live also, as the name suggests, is a live game, and that means that Blizzard are spinning all of these plates at the same time that they're responding to the current problems that the game has, perceived future problems with the game, and future content development. All of this makes it far harder for the Live team to manage their communications, especially when they have firmly committed to some things that they do believe are for the best of some groups of players, but absolutely do cause issues for others, and how it's a balancing act. Easy examples are things like Titan forging and enforced personal loot, which very much do benefit some players, but very much do not benefit other players. By fostering this divided player base through a game design that nobly does try to cater to all players, they have ended up making it extremely difficult to keep everybody happy. And I think that's why we see such a difference between Classic and Live communications. With Classic, well, most people are on the same page. With Live, that ain't the case, and that is something that is then compounded by them, not really being that great at communications. At least that's my read in this divide, and why Blizzard may try hard with their live communications, especially with things like the Q&A, but seemingly do struggle to have their efforts deliver results. Personally, I think that much of this could be fixed by restoring gearing to a sane place, making it a less important part of endgame, and then having far greater and more broad character progression that just is not power related and not gear related. Just shaking up the game a bit and making it more of an RPG and less of an ARPG with your friends. Again, more on that next week. The final thing I would recommend for Blizzard staff, though, is a Twitter detox. Twitter is not the place to vent, and that's something I say knowing that I've made mistakes there in the past, and that has led to me engaging with Twitter far less than I used to. So it means that these days, if I throw shade on Twitter, it's calculated. So, that is the classic versus live communications topic covered. With that, let's talk about the classic updates that have sparked off this entire discussion. So, spell batching. This is a really cool topic. It's really techy and fun. Right, these days, servers are amazing. They can perform really, really well. To cut the technical jargon out, they can do loads of things per second, and that means that if you and your enemy both cast an instant spell like 10 ms apart, the server will deal with that, and it will resolve them in the correct order. But you see, back in 2004, that wasn't the case. Servers would have to more and more batch actions together and deal with some things pretty much in one go. And this would lead to a situation where a warrior could pummel a mage who was casting polymorph at the same time, resulting in the warrior being polymorphed and the mage suffering damage from being pummeled, but not being spell locked because the pummel technically did not interrupt a spell because they both were resolved in the same batch. Another example would be two warriors that could charge at each other at the same time, leading to them not going like this, but going like this, and swapping places. These interactions may seem strange, but once you know that they were essentially just happening because the same batch of spells was being processed by the server, then it all makes a hell of a lot more sense. And this ended up essentially being a feature of classic World of Warcraft gameplay, especially in instances like PvP. And it's an example where top-notch servers would actually make the classic experience less authentic to the vanilla WoW experience, which is something that the developers, after listening to players, actually don't want. So because of this, they've decided to decrease the priority of spell cast resolution on the server end, giving us batching that's going to feel far closer to vanilla, giving people combat as it was back then. And it really does reveal the philosophy that's driving the classic team. They earnestly want to recreate the 1.12 experience, even if it means having old bits of jank still be in there. And broadly, that's such an interesting topic, because in many games you've got things like bunny hopping and strafe jumping. Originally, they were engine bugs, but they absolutely ended up being core to the gameplay of many titles. Now, the next classic topic is the loot sharing system. So, loot sharing was added in Wrath, and it would let people share loot with their party members within a 2-hour limit. It was mainly there to save people from misclicks during raid looting, and it's been quite the topic of discussion for Classic, where of course it was originally not a thing. Blizzard have settled on a middle ground with this issue. There is going to be a 2-hour sharing window, but it's only going to be available for soul-bound raid loot. It seems reasonable enough to me, to be honest. I know it wasn't there originally, but I think what I liked the most about their post is how they acknowledged that this was not how it was in Classic. They acknowledged it was a middle ground saying this: what we hope to do is strike a balance between saving players' time and minimizing the potential for abuse of the system. We think this approach better addresses the concerns we've heard from players on the subject. And you know what? I think it's fantastic, just this level of communication. It's something that I would love to see more of with Live, as I've covered in this video. I mean, it's all a similar enough community team, being real with you, so I think the difference in communication quality partially is just because Live WoW is inherently a lot more difficult to navigate than Classic WoW. And I suppose on that communication topic, Caden, who of course was one of the World of Warcraft CMs who was let go in the most recent wave of Activision Blizzard job losses, during a 1-minute Twitch clip, he was talking about Ian in the forums, because somebody on his Twitch stream said, does Ian read the forums? How much is Ian actually exposed to the criticism that the game gets? And Caden pretty much said, if something's on the forum, Ian's probably read it, to the point where Ian would often send the community team forum threads that they hadn't seen because he was just super on the ball with that community feedback. And, that makes a lot of sense to me, to be honest. It's hard to resist reading about, what's going on with your work, and that definitely, it definitely does make sense to me. And I think for a lot of people are going to hear that and think, well, we still have Titan forging. We still have all of these, kind of modern systems that I think may be popular with a vast but not vocal majority of players, or maybe just don't factor into the decision-making of a vast but not vocal majority of players, but of course are a major issue for the more vocal players, who of course are the people who are more likely to, talk in the forums and do things like that, or make YouTube videos, whatever. So it's weird. I think, to me, it just does highlight that there's a lot of things where the vocal World of Warcraft community disagrees with the World of Warcraft development team, but the non-vocal World of Warcraft community just seems to roll along with those things. And I would hypothesize that that means that Blizzard pretty much has the numbers to say that, yeah, you know, these systems pretty much are working out. Sure, we get a lot of flack for them, but actually when we look overall at our entire player base, they seem to work. And I think that really does touch on what I was talking about earlier with the communication and how World of Warcraft is such a big but not cohesive game, and how that just makes managing all those different categories of player so very difficult for the team, really leaving them in a pretty darn rough situation. I think from my perspective, what I'd like to see them do is actually stop the Q&As in a way. I would rather that those Q&As were more prepared. I don't feel like we're getting Ian's best when it's just off the top of his head. I actually think it would be better for them to collate feedback over a month, and for Ian to maybe, you know, some evening or maybe just spend a day locked away somewhere, just writing his thoughts on issues. And sure, it's fine to go philosophical there, and actually just getting in front of the camera and doing a presentation on those issues. I don't mean a slideshow or anything, but I mean, you know, a developer session with the lead guy of WoW, just talking about those issues in a more prepared format where we can really get the best of what he thinks. You know, I mentioned earlier in this video strawmans, and often that's because the kind of, you know, the first thing that comes to mind about something that you're trying to disagree with, it's often not a steel man of that position. But I think if Ian actually had the time to be able to just kind of think deeper about these things, I think he really would be able to provide just answers that would be more acceptable to the community, that would really allow just their communication to be more effective. So I think they should do that instead of the Q&As. I think at this stage, we have enough data to show that the Q&As kind of just throw more fuel in the fire, and they rarely seem to achieve their goals with them. So maybe they need to rethink that. Certainly, they have a nice set, they have nice cameras, nice mics, there's a lot to play with there. I maybe just think they should evolve the format, and maybe just learn that maybe the current way of doing things isn't working out that well. So there you go, that's my thoughts. I think an interesting episode, you know, talking about developer communication. We kind of do get into a lot of philosophy stuff and a lot of why player bases form the way that they do, how all those interactions work, and as much as they are very connected to a game that we all maybe have, you know, varying feelings about, it at the very least is an interesting phenomenon to talk about and to try to get to the bottom of. So, I mean, at the very least, we get to have fun doing that, I suppose. Anyway, let me know what you think about all of these communication issues down below. Of course, if you're interested in this, lovely Patreon loot that I can mail your way, check out the Patreon. There's also a vlog there. And I mean, yeah, with that, I don't think I've got anything else. Thank you very much for watching this video. Let me know what you think. I'll see you next time.